When you think about Trinidad, a few things come to mind immediately. But bearing the weight of all that color and noise and the spice and vice is a liquid foundation, the petroleum economy. Many things about Trinidad have changed over the years, but oil dependency has remained a constant. And if the past is a guide, it doesn't bode well for the future. Trinidad had its first oil boom in the 1980s, and it didn't end well. Now here, at the end of a gas boom, it appears the country hasn't learned from past experience. And there's a twist in the tale.
When we had the downturn in the economy in the 1980s, that caused a lot of the older manufacturing, import substitution-based manufacturing industries to essentially collapse.
Two twists, actually. The first is that fossil fuel technology is being phased out, so the price is unstable. The second is that Trinidadian reservoirs might finally be running dry.
So in Trinidad, we do have still decades of natural gas left in Trinidad, which has yet to be found. We don't have enough gas to have growth in the volumes of natural gas. Okay? So we're struggling now to maintain a plateau of natural gas production at its current level. I mean, in fact, it fell the last few years. It's going back up to that plateau.
I think it's important to remember that, that the petroleum sector and natural gas provides a lot of revenue to the government. And the successive governments have essentially taken those revenues and they have recycled those revenues into the non-energy economy, not with a view to increasing investment for diversification, but is essentially to support current consumption.
The international situation with regard to energy prices is hitting home. People are losing their jobs in TNT, ArcelorMittal, OAS, Repsol, BP. People are going home, they're joining the breadline, and they are looking to you for a safety net.
Our revenue earners are now not earning across the board. Oil, gas, commodities, they're all down in price. So we can't expect the revenues, and that has brought on issues of foreign exchange shortages, job losses, and the job losses you see here, some of it is they're announced abroad. Boardrooms abroad take decisions to cut back in Trinidad and elsewhere. We'll feel that effect here. What we've managed to do so far is where the government is the employer, we have managed to maintain that, but it is being done largely on some significant borrowing. You can only borrow so much. So in terms of going forward, we will have to adjust so as to sustain a situation in our economy.
So the supply is uncertain and the price is volatile. Economics aside, there's a human factor at play. Oil has defined the nation for better or worse. An anthropologist, David Hughes, recently published a book, Energy Without Conscience, which describes Trinidadians as apathetic energy hogs with the fourth highest per capita carbon emissions in the world. So being an oil nation has affected the way Trinidadians approach life. Extravagant, feckless, and entitled.
Whether it is this administration or the previous administration or administrations past, what you have is a political directorate which is so focused on acquiring the rents from the energy sector and distributing those rents to the rest of us in society by subsidizing various things. So we subsidize water and electricity, and we subsidize gasoline at the pump, and everything is subsidized. And all of that subsidy comes from the rents from the energy sector. And basically what the political directorate is doing that because it sustains their voter base and so on. And so therefore there has never really been a commitment to diversification and transformation of the society. I think I can say that without fear of contradiction.
But somewhere along the way, it created what's been called the dependency syndrome.
In terms of the energy sector making people lazy and not innovating, I don't really see that in Trinidad. I actually see a lot of quite innovative companies who actually do try to innovate and do things differently. And people are entrepreneurial. I think that it ebbs and flows as the fortunes of the government ebb and flow. And the government starts spending a lot of money, people tend to be less innovative. But I think it's pretty difficult to do a lot of product innovation in a small economy.
And alongside the desire to redistribute the wealth, there were attempts at transformation. Everyone has heard the phrase, diversify the economy.
You're always hearing about diversification. It's an annoying word.
But the necessity for transformation still exists, and in the present, it's led Trinidad to look for economic salvation in all the wrong places.
If we are to tap into serious inflows of foreign investment, we have to look to economies that have investment and looking to invest it abroad, and China is where that is today. What we're talking about is trying to create in Trinidad and Tobago a ship servicing business to service large ocean-going vessels. It comes in an area where we have expertise, we have skills. And on my trip to China, I went to one of these companies that is interested in Trinidad and Tobago in this discussion to see exactly what they do. And it is the kind of business that the people of Trinidad and Tobago, particularly those people who have grown up in and around the energy sector, it's welding, it's painting, it's handling of machines. That is what this government is doing. And the heads of the Chinese government indicated to us that they accept our position of not simply providing opportunities for Chinese contractors, but that we need that equity investment, that foreign investment. And they've indicated that they're happy to have their companies participate in enterprises which are commercially sound. And that is why I went to China.
China is the new world economic superpower, but the haste to link with that country, whose language Trinidadians do not speak and whose political system they do not share, seems to be progressing at an unusually rapid pace.
There are plans to develop yet another industrial park. This one follows a memorandum of agreement that was signed on Monday between ETECT and Beijing Construction Engineering Group. The $104 million Phoenix Park industrial estate is to be financed through a loan agreement with China's Exim Bank and will cover 133 acres.
We also negotiated with Beijing Construction to have at least 10 major Chinese firms come as the anchor tenants for this industrial park.
Additionally, Minister Young says steps have been taken to encourage Chinese banks to consider doing business in TNT.
We are about to invite at least 5 Chinese banks to Trinidad and Tobago to see if we could get the financial sector going. We don't see the introduction of Chinese banks, and we still have to persuade them this is a good place to set up business. Having anything but a positive effect on the banking sector of Trinidad and Tobago, at minimum, it will introduce a level of competitiveness.
The reality is that Trinidad's economic situation is dire.
And even as I speak to you now, we are 80 miles off our east coast, drilling in deep water. And those of you who are good at praying, I'm asking you to pray.
Under the mask of national confidence is a face of helplessness and desperation, which drives the nation to seek powerful friends. The desperation is also driven by the fact that the country is unprepared for the post-petroleum economy. That preparation has been the job of various governments and institutions of higher learning. They haven't done a good job. Not only that, the country has failed to exploit the knowledge and experience of its recent history.
Well, I think there really has not been enough work done to properly document the knowledge which exists. And I think that really comes down to this failure of the lack of linkages between the university and the energy sector, other than as a training institution. So the universities train people to go and work in the industry. But in terms of research, documenting, understanding, analysing, we haven't really seen enough of that happen.
Why is this? One reason is that oil wealth has caused the country to define itself in a particular way. Apart from the primary occupations, digging wealth out of the earth and exporting it, after a generation of thinking, money ain't no problem, many Trinidadians have come to think of themselves as capable only of sport, song, and dance. But is that true? Do these look like song and dance men? No. These men are famous for history, physics, political economy, literature. They were players on the world stage. There's more to add to that list. Unlike the others, his greatness was realized over the length of the country's history from before independence right up to 2017 when he died. Anthony N. Sabga was probably the most successful businessman the country has ever seen, and he created a means to stimulate economic development outside the dependency on government money. The organization he created, the Anthony N. Sabga Caribbean Awards for Excellence, has gone further than any other to solve the problems of economic and social underdevelopment. But we'll get to him later. All these men are proof of one thing, that the intellectual capacity for economic and social transformation exists in Trinidad and Tobago. And at least part of the oil windfall has been spent on education to exploit that potential.
UWI, $2 billion, costing us $2 billion. UTT, $1.2 billion. So between these two universities, it's costing the revenue, the treasury, $3.2 billion just to operate those two institutions.
What are the returns on these enormous investments? What happens to the raw intellectual material that goes into the universities? The answer might surprise you. What if I told you the holy grail of diversifying the economy was to be found in those very universities?
Some people are still making $25 a week at the newspaper writing columns about diversification. Annoying. When you ask them, diversify into what? They can't tell you. What would you do to diversify the economy, especially if you abandon the energy sector? They can't tell you.
We have an answer to that question. Look at these three men, Adesh Ramsubag, Patrick Hossain, and Paul Tilak Singh. Adesh Ramsubag is a microbiologist from the University of the West Indies. He is literally creating wealth from the dirt beneath our feet. He is working to create new pharmaceuticals from indigenous microorganisms, of which there's an inexhaustible supply in soil and sea. It's potentially worth billions of dollars, and at least one of our Caribbean neighbors has realized it.
So the Caribbean region has tremendous biodiversity resources, and these resources have tremendous potential for generating revenue by developing different types of industries. So Cuba is perhaps the best example we have in this region. They have started to invest significantly in biotechnology since the 1980s. Today they are one of the giants in the world. They are exporting biotechnology-related products in the hundreds of millions of US dollars every year. We can say they have tens of thousands of workers employed directly by that industry, multi-billion-dollar industry. Trinidad and Tobago has significant biodiversity resources as well. Our biodiversity may have more potential than even Cuba. And we have seen that in our research. We have a few compounds that are on the way for drug development. We have one product that is in the process of being patented that can be used in the treatment of antibiotic-resistant infections. If successful, it will be a game changer in the fight against antibiotic-resistant infections.
That's the real world. What about the cyber world where we can literally create something from nothing? Can native ingenuity manifest here? Yes, says Patrick Hossain, an MIT scholar, mathematician, and computer scientist. Born in Curep, he has more than 40 patents in internet and cell phone technology. He returned to Trinidad a few years ago to the University of the West Indies.
When I first returned to Trinidad about 6 years ago, my area of expertise was wireless communications, cellular communications. Having worked at companies such as Ericsson and Huawei and AT&T, doing research in radio resource management, etc. But after about 2 years here at UE, I realized that research didn't really align with the needs of the country. And so I started looking more deeply to see what area of research would align with what the country needs. And initially, I looked at various things like Internet of Things and cybersecurity, etc. But I finally decided that I wanted to focus on data science, data analytics. It's also known as artificial intelligence.
Not satisfied at the institution's attitude to research, he founded a think tank called TT Lab, which pays people to think, write, and publish scientific research.
Initially, the goal was to take students, even undergrad students, and have them do relatively advanced research that they could publish. Within the last 3 years, we've published maybe on the order of about 22 papers, publications in international conferences and journals. And what we're trying to do now is, in addition to publishing, which is needed, because we're at a university, but we also want to create innovative products. When we go out to industry, we try to find real problems that they need solved, come up with some novel solutions for it. We solve a practical problem, but we have a sufficiently novel solution that we could publish internationally.
TT Lab's research also has an economic dimension in creating locally what is now purchased from abroad. But much scientific knowledge already exists. Can we derive benefits from the innovative use of already existing knowledge? Meet Professor Paul Tiluk-Singh, a medical doctor and researcher, also at the UWI, who is doing just that.
The future development of this country will rely on the mind power and brain power and physical prowess of our citizens being conceived today. We could apply the science and understanding of early human development to project, predict, and cater for our future needs.
Wealth for him is human capital, which is the primary requirement for economic development. Before any other form of capital can be created, human capital in mental, physical, and emotional capacity must exist. And health has direct and indirect economic costs. Disease is costly to treat, and it stunts productivity and innovation.
So this all started from a simple clinical observation. We observed that our kids were developing type 2 diabetes. Now, this is the type of diabetes normally associated with elderly folk. And this shocked us. And we conducted a series and succession of studies that showed how huge a problem it was. But in trying to address that problem, it's like allowing the horse to have bolted and then trying to lock the gate. And that's where we started to shift our research into the womb. A baby exposed to a diabetic environment in the womb, even a subtly diabetic environment, not full-fledged diabetes, is more likely to express diabetes and cardiovascular disease in future life. So the thrust of our work is aimed at early identification, aggressive treatment, filling the gaps in the treatment chain, using technology to bridge those gaps, to bring results earlier to moms and to doctors for more decisive and early actions and earlier intervention. The intention is, by aggressive treatment today, we could protect future generations to fulfill our developmental needs.
As Trinidad and Tobago's experience has shown, it doesn't matter how much money you throw at a problem. As long as the intellectual capacity to create sustainable value is absent, the wealth soon disappears, leaving the nation worse off. Dr. Tiluk-Singh heads 2 research projects, one in diabetes and one on pregnancy.
DERP is meant to research the entire area of diabetes, but the HIP-TT is a subset of our work focusing on pregnancy. In pregnancy, you don't have time to waste. Results ought to be available as real-time as possible. So, to overcome that gap between doing a test and obtaining the results, we developed an app. This was custom designed, which was homemade and which was pioneered and developed locally to reduce the time lag between getting the test done and delivering results to mom and doctors. The science has provided the data. Our work is essentially translational, taking what is known in the scientific literature, bringing it from the pages to the clinic.
So Trinidad has the capacity for transformational thinking and people who have done it. The country also has untapped, sustainable resources which can generate new wealth and create human and social capital. So why haven't these things been done? 2 reasons: money and culture. Let's look at the money issue first.
At the University of the West Indies here in Trinidad, we have a significant amount of research taking place. So we get a lot of articles published in leading journals around the world. But unfortunately, because we don't have the funding available, we cannot translate that research into products and services.
What are some of the products?
So recently, I've had 2 students working on natural products from our indigenous bacteria, and 1 student working on a bacteria from the pitch lake, isolated 9 novel compounds, all of which are in classes of different types of drugs.
In addition to the compounds that make antibiotics more potent, there are applications which range from the oil industry to agriculture.
So what we're looking at is using the indigenous microorganisms and using them to solubilize the oil, encourage more oil and heavier oil to come out of the formations. I've been doing this research for about a year and a half now, and we already have significant results. Dr. Ramsubag was very instrumental in designing the project, and he's been a source of encouragement, throughout all the little hiccups we've had so far.
So the potential is tremendous, and as I said before, it is constrained by lack of funding.
But how much money are we talking about here? Do we have an actual number in mind?
If we could, let's say, invest an average of $5 to $10 million a year for 10 years, the potential returns from that investment would more than likely be in the billions of dollars. A typical research institute in the US or in Europe might have research funding worth millions of dollars on a regular basis. So for instance, every 3 to 5 years, they may be getting $2 to $3 million to carry out specific research projects. In our situation, we have to depend on seed financing from the university itself. And generally, we are talking about maybe less than 100,000 TT we might get every couple of years.
Can we afford it? It seems we can. If a fraction of the money spent on projects with no discernible benefit were invested in scientific research, the returns would be enormous. But this brings us back to the state and its political economy, or how resource allocation decisions are made. We asked the present Minister of Planning to be interviewed for this documentary. She declined. But these government documents show no entries for research and development. However, there has been government spending on scientific activity. An example is Evolving Technologies and Enterprise Development Company Limited, better known as ETEC. The bare facts of this company display the government's awareness of the importance of scientific research to economic development.
Over a decade ago, it was envisioned by one of the country's leading visionaries for this park to be a science and technology park, which will usher in a new phase of industrial growth in Trinidad and Tobago by focusing specifically on diversification into the non-energy sector. ETEC was given the very noble and indeed important mandate to develop this park as a science and technology park. Fast forward into July 2016, Cabinet then agreed that the core activities for Tamina will be a focus on the following 6 sectors: information and communication technology, business process outsourcing, data processing centers, animation and software development, high-value manufacturing, and financial services.
Unfortunately, little of that agenda was realized, and its core activity business is, as was seen earlier, being left to foreign firms. And here is where the second reason for persistent underdevelopment arises: culture. The intangible force in society which is just as powerful as a force of nature.
The question of culture, people define culture in a number of different ways. I think, from my perspective, I'm focused on the question of our values, attitudes, and behaviors as a society. And the fact of the matter is that, as I see it, what we have inherited over basically from colonial times to now is that we have inherited a certain set of values, attitudes, and behaviors which are not conducive to economic efficiency and to economic progress.
The names of previous development paradigms give a hint of the problem. Import substitution, industrialization by invitation, direct foreign investment, transfer of technology. What these all had in common was that salvation had to come from abroad. But in the 21st century, while knowledge comes from abroad, expertise and potential exist here. The idea doesn't seem to have caught on. Let's look at two stories of local use of foreign knowledge by locals and government response. Have a look at this handsome fellow. The Buffalipso is a hybrid species created in Trinidad by Dr. Stephen Bennett. Its milk, meat, and constitution are superior to conventional strains of cattle.
Many countries have imported our Buffalipso, including Cuba, Costa Rica, Colombia, and Argentina. And they now have a thriving dairy industry that is centered to some extent around our Buffalipso. And our genetic stock is being used to develop the economies of these countries. Whereas in Trinidad, the Buffalipso is under severe threat.
The Agriculture Minister Clarence Rambarat is dismissing the possibility of further state involvement in the Buffalipso industry, and he's daring the private sector to take up the challenge. He says a differently shaped ministry can make the current state farms available to the private sector, but government should not be involved in the Buffalipso business.
Here's another story of a Trinidadian using innovative foreign knowledge which promised a way out of the oil economy, but which met with the same fate as the Buffalipso.
We talk about success stories and Trinidad and Tobago nationals who are breaking the barriers and doing big things, not just out in the US, but launching creative and innovative technologies. I'm talking about a disruptor. Well, David Ramjohn joins us on set at this time. When I read the bio, you spoke about conscious capitalism, and that is what, one of the founding principles of what you guide your life by, your leadership style, and your company. But your decision to go to Texas and then be part of this company that is also taking algae and creating a whole set of products. So that in itself, how did you end up in this company?
When I was working at the Environmental Management Authority here in Trinidad, after I had completed my studies, and I was put on a committee to look at alternative and renewable energy, really looking at ways to diversify away from oil and gas. When oil and gas runs out, which it will, what do? Studying algae for biofuels led me to realize that there was so much more that these organisms could do. And I ended up looking at them for pretty much everything else, all the non-fuel products that you can make from algae. We are looking to apply algae as the solution, a sustainable solution for a post-petroleum world. I had started a project here in Trinidad back in 2013, presented it to the Exim Bank. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to secure the collateral needed to secure the loan from the Exim Bank. And eventually, what happened was the company in Texas is a company that I had identified whose technology was going to be used here. So I've been working with them since 2013, but as a Trinidadian, trying to do this here in Trinidad. And
have you made any headway at all?
None. Yeah. So fast forward to 2016, and the company says to me, well, we've seen what your business plan looks like. You're not making any progress in Trinidad. Why don't you come here and be our CEO? So that's how I ended up there.
So while it is not averse to science, the Trinidad government seems averse to local science. But there are other local creations the government seems more partial to, like Carnival, which has gotten literally billions of dollars since the turn of the century. This is because in the last 2 decades, an idea that's been gaining momentum is that culture can be monetized. This idea has influential proponents.
The Trinidad and Tobago economy is a petro economy, a hydrocarbon economy, which is a finite resource. We all know that, and we all know that the Trinidad and Tobago economy needs to diversify. This is one of the clear areas where we couldn't do so. And really, Trinidad and Tobago has a strong festival economy. So it's not just Trinidad and Tobago Carnival. It's everything from Pagua, Housay, Tobago Jazz, Borrow Day, and the list goes on. So the overarching question is, what is the strategy for generating income from this festival economy?
Ms. Berg, just to bring you in, how do we turn away from looking at Carnival as just a festival and making it into an industry, one that we benefit from year long?
Well, I think that it's important that we understand that the festival is the seedbed for all the other things that we need in the industry in terms of, generating employment, creating foreign exchange, branding the country, and those kinds of things. I don't want us to get into this very binary discussion where it's either festival or industry. The two are interrelated and interlocked. They're all part of a creative ecology.
But Carnival is 200 years old, and the idea of it being a tourist event has been proposed before. So if it were profitable, we would know it by now. And given the $1 billion or so that have been invested since 2000 in the name of diversifying the economy, there should be some sign of the return on that investment.
We have in preparation 4 studies that are looking at various aspects of the carnival, from the socio and cultural dimension and community development elements, to looking at government spend on carnival, to also looking at the economic impact. So we're collating and pulling those together. So in a couple months, we think we'll be able to publish and launch those studies. It generates a fillip in the economy. There's a multiplier effect, which we have actually never calculated. In fact, for the whole tourism sector, we haven't been doing multiplier effect studies. There's also what we call a catalytic effect, that it generates this business opportunities for artists and cultural entrepreneurs who are then able to export their services throughout the region and further afield.
This is strange, since Dr. Nurse published a paper in 2004 saying that Carnival generated returns of 7-1. Dr. Burke participated in a conference called Think at UWI St. Augustine in 2011, where she said much the same thing about Carnival's profitability, as if it was settled science. Okay, so Carnival and economics equal old mass. A question we cannot pursue here, but which is worth asking, is why every government Trinidad has had since 2000 is happy to spend billions of dollars on a non-performing asset, but won't spend a few million on scientific research. The answer could be public versus private sector economics, which brings us to the role of the private sector and private individuals. Private businesses have made literally billions in the last 15 years with the new gas boom. What do they do as far as reinvestment is concerned?
Yeah, undeniably there's been not enough investment in research and development in Trinidad and Tobago, including from the private sector. But I think that the trick to this is to try to find ways of linking up the universities with the private sector, because there are enough good minds and good brains out there for people to be doing this work. It's about trying to find the right structures for that actually to happen. I think that what we need to do is find ways of taking all of the knowledge and experience which we have existing in the oil, gas, and petrochemical sector, and get people to transition to thinking about other things aligned to that. I think you're beginning to see that happening, and the interest is certainly there. But I think that you need a all hands on deck type sort of approach to that.
Our economic success in Trinidad and Tobago, and I dare say in the Caribbean as a whole, requires that government shrink and that the private sector grows. The governments are too large and they're too dominant. But our private sector as well has also been participative in the whole rent-seeking approach to economic success. If you look at our companies that we have and what they do and how they do it and how they achieve what they achieve in terms of the profitability and so on, there are almost none of them that are invested in research and development.
In many developed economies, they invest significantly in research and innovation. I can say some countries like Korea, which has about the highest investments in research and innovation, they spend almost 4% of their GDP towards research and development. America, you are looking at around 3%. And in Trinidad and Tobago, it's only less than 0.5 of 1%.
Outside of purely commercial enterprises, business in the metropole has another function which is barely seen in Trinidad and Tobago: philanthropy, or giving money to artistic, social, and scientific causes with no expectation of returns. Here, names like Ford, Nobel, and Guggenheim sound familiar. Is there any such initiative in Trinidad and Tobago? Yes. Anthony and Sabga, who came here as an immigrant and built a billion-dollar empire, launched a form of social investment which never seems to have been tried in Trinidad and Tobago or the region: giving money to smart people. This money allows people to do innovative and exciting things in the arts, sciences, and business. The benefits redound to society as a whole. Interestingly, Sabga was the first person to believe in the potential of Trinidad to be something more than an oil producer. He pioneered Answer Industries in the 1960s, which built appliances and electronics from the ground up. Later in his life, he had an idea that he should promote something larger than himself. He called it the Anthony and Sabga Caribbean Awards for Excellence, and it was launched in 2005. Throughout the region, as of 2018, 34 people had received $500,000 TT each to pursue work in science, art, civic activism, and entrepreneurship. It seems to be working, since this is what the three scientists discussed here have in common. They are all laureates of the Sabga Awards.
So the Answer Caribbean Awards not only lifted the profile of our research, but lifts the profile of people working in the area who may share common goals and aspirations, and allows for collaboration among scientists and colleagues. And one such example was looking at Dave Chady's work on mosquito control. And he and I later developed a curriculum for implementation at the CXC level.
The Anthony Sabga Award has really helped me in that I was able to push certain areas of research that I wouldn't have been able to do previously.
And it's not just in Trinidad. This is a Sabga laureate who is now Vice President of Guyana.
I benefited immensely from the countless opportunities which presented themselves following that recognition. This contribution, or this award, caused me to be able to meet persons who had the willingness to give support to ideas that would be able to have us creating more opportunities for jobs and other recognition.
There are also laureates in Jamaica, St. Vincent, Grenada, Dominica, and other islands of the region. Yes, this awards program has brought people from all over the region together in a way that's never been done before. But let's tie the Sabga Awards into our initial question. What happens to Trinidad and Tobago after the oil runs dry? The correct answer will not rely on foreign investment. It relies upon the country's capacity to innovate, government and private sector investment in science and technology, and collaboration among all parties. Look at some data from the World Economic Forum. As Trinidad's per capita wealth has increased, its capacity to innovate has decreased. As the government has spent more money, the private sector has made more money. But the benefits do not redound to society. The solutions to these problems are complex. But first, they need a definition of the problem, which we've begun here. And we have presented one possible solution proposed by the Anthony and Sabga Caribbean Awards. Trust local knowledge, invest in it, and support it. The rewards will surprise you.